my name is Claudia Bazan and today I'll introduce you to Sagrada. It is a game for 1 to 4 players by designers Daryl Andrews and Adrian Adamescu, published by Floodgate Games. Based on the mechanics of dice drafting, in Sagrada, players compete to be the best artist by creating the most beautiful stained glass window of the Sagrada Familia, with colored dice. All this between 30 to 45 minutes. The game is played during 10 rounds in which players have to place these dice on their stained glass boards, sticking to the numbers and color conditions. For theme purposes, numbers are called shades in this game. After 10 rounds, the player who obtains the highest number of victory points will be the winner. These are the components for the game Sagrada. Here are the player boards we are going to use to build our stained glass window. Here are the pattern cards that are inserted into the player boards. In this section, we have the public objectives. This will help us to collect points during the game for the final score. Here, we have the private objective cards. These cards are secret and also award points at the end of the game. These are tool cards, which are going to help us modify and bend the rules a bit in our favor to fulfill our pattern board. Over here, we have favor tokens. These tokens will help us in using the tool cards. And this is the bag that contains the colored dice we'll use to build our stained glass window. Here, we have the score markers for each player. These also include a side of 50, in case we go over 50 points on the board. Finally, here we have our round track that will indicate from 1 to 10 the rounds we're going to follow until the end of the game. And on the other side, the score track to count our points at the end of the game. During the preparation, the first thing we have to do is to deal 2 pattern cards to each player. These cards differ from each other by their level of difficulty. Here we can see that this one has a higher level of difficulty because it has 5 points in the lower right corner. This one is a bit simpler, so it has a lower difficulty. For this example, we are going to choose this card, which will give us 5 favor tokens which we can use throughout the game. Now we have to deal 3 public objective cards for everyone to see. For each game, these cards will indicate certain rules that we have to follow in order to win the score that is indicated here. In this case, for each row without repeated colors, we will earn 6 points. This card indicates that we will earn as many points as adjacent dice of the same color placed diagonally. This card shows that we earn 2 points for each group of 5 and 6 that we have in any location of the stained glass window. Then, we have the private objectives that will earn the players the sum of the values written on the dice on their board, from the color shown on the card. In this case, we were randomly dealt the red one. Now we're going to choose 3 tool cards to use throughout the game. These tool cards will be explained later in the video. All public and private objective and tool cards that have not been used are put aside and will not be used during the entire game. Now, fulfilling these objectives is not so easy. We have certain restrictions to fulfill every time we want to add a new die to our player board. The first time we're going to place a die on our board, we must do it on either edge of the board. In this case, we will place it here. Then, every time we want to add another die to our board, we must follow 3 main rules. First, all the dice must be adjacent to a die that is already on our board. It can be diagonal. Second, you must follow the color or number restrictions associated with the pattern card shown on the player's board. Third, a die cannot be positioned in a space that contains orthogonally any die of the color or number shown on the die I want to play. Now, we'll see what happens in each round. The players can carry out their turn playing 2 different actions, of which they can do only one of the 2, both, or none and pass. The 2 possible actions are take a die from the reserve and put it on their player board and/or play a tool card. In order to do this, the starting player draws randomly from the pool 2 dice for each player in the game, plus 1 extra die. In this case, in a game of 3 players, we will draw 7 dice. Then the player throws the dice, and the players will take turns to draw one die at a time in each turn, starting with the first player and continuing clockwise until the last player. After this, the players take a second turn, but now going in the opposite direction. So the last player will roll 2 dice in a row until reaching the first player again. We'll have 1 die left in the reserve, which will be used to mark the end of the round on the round track. This way we have finished a round in Sagrada. Now that we know the restrictions and how to play a turn, we will see what can be done with these tool cards. This first card allows us to move a die from one place on our player board to another, ignoring the color restrictions of the pattern. This card says that when we choose a die, we can increase or decrease its value by 1 to match our pattern. Here, after a player's first turn, they can choose another die, skipping the turns of the other players. These colors shown here will only be used in the solo mode. Now, how can we use these tool cards? The first time someone uses one of these cards, they must pay a favorite token, leaving it on the top of the card they use. From now on, everyone who wants to access this particular card must pay 2 favorite tokens to use it. After 10 rounds, in which we'll try to fill our player's board, the end of the game is activated and the players proceed to count their victory points by adding up the values obtained by the public and private objectives and the amount of favorite tokens they have left. But be careful, every space that is empty at the end of the game will subtract 1 point from the total victory points obtained. To count our victory points, we flip this board over to use the score markers to advance on the scoreboard, and the player with the most victory points will be the winner. First, I'd like to say that I love Sagrada, because despite of having a lot of randomness involved by the dice, it is a game with plenty of tactics. Also, it is a simple game, but very eye-catching on the table. With all these colored dice and all these player boards, everyone loves it. It has a very original theme, and it plays very well with any number of players. Even with the solitary version, which I find it is interesting and defiant, it will be good for anyone who likes to play solo games. Also, it has a good running time. It's not a game that's too long, it's not too short, it's not like a light filler game. It's a game with a lot of replayability. Having many cards with different patterns, different objectives and tool cards, you can play very different game each time you play it. In addition, it has an expansion for 5 to 6 players. Also, it has 3 more expansions. Each of them add a lot of new ways to play, objectives and dice. It can be introduced to people who are new to board games, having fairly simple explanation and not that many rules. I have introduced this game to several people who have played very few board games, and it turned out pretty well. Regarding balance, I can say that the easier your board is, the less you have to break the rules with tools, so it doesn't hurt much to start with less favorite tokens than the rest of the players. On the downside, there can be a little bit of analysis paralysis if you have players in your group that are prone to that, but it doesn't happen very often because turns are very short and you have the dice right in front of you, so everyone can think about which die to take beforehand, and you have more than one alternative if someone takes that away from you. There is room for hate drafting, yeah, but it is something that can happen with several types of games. It's not that terrible because you are trying to fill your own grid before the other players. It is not that recurrent of a situation, but towards the end of the game, it can happen in more than one occasion. If you're a player with big fingers and clumsiness is your thing, I recommend having an extra delicacy since the dice can turn over, interrupting the development of the game, although it happens very rarely, but just be careful. Overall, this game is such a good game, guys. I love Sagrada. The art is amazing. I love every detail of it. I mean, look at these dice, are awesome. It's a good game to impress your guests. If you display it on the table, it looks pretty cool. Personally, I try to avoid games with a lot of dice rolling because of the randomness and luck involved. But the first time I played Sagrada, I was very impressed because of the amount of tactics that require to fulfill every space of the grid. So yeah, it's a very tactical game. If you like this kind of games, this may be for you. I'll give this one an 8 out of 10, so that means it gets a seal of approval from me. Thanks for watching, I'm Claudia Bazan, and I'll see you in another round.